Because of advances in AI video, we're watching the democratization of superhero movies for every culture on Earth. This is the Avengers of China. Like, why not, right? Everybody gets to make something that resonates with their own community. Maybe your like HOA neighborhood will be like, we're the Avengers of, HOA in your neighborhood. And it'll be as cinematic as this. Why not? Look, that could be your local Karen just like busting somebody with too many leaves in their yard or whatever. Your personal fascination with birds like kestrels is taking an AI twist.
Birds like kestrels have always fascinated scientists and engineers with their remarkable flight capabilities, particularly their ability to soar and hover effortlessly in dynamic airflow.
Okay, so check this out. It's a robot. It's not a drone because it's not building its own thrust or propellers or anything like that. It's just so smart at detecting how the wind is hitting it. It angles those things in just such a way that it hovers. I mean, think of the solution space that it had to work through to adapt and be able to just solve every weird mixing air current. I don't know. This is like when AI starts just doing stuff that like seems like humans would never be able to engineer it. Apple's putting its AI on Linux machines. We gotta see what this is all about. Luckily for us, Andres spent the weekend finding the catch. So we'll talk about some of AI. They're hinting at Apple about doing something super different here. Like, why would Apple ship it as a first-class protocol and then give it a Python binding that runs on a Linux box that has never even seen an Apple product? Like, what are they doing here? I'll share some interesting opinions from Tim Anderson about how mathematics actually comes from thought itself. Like, could math actually emerge as a byproduct of thinking? We'll look at how AI-driven automation is actually affecting jobs, how a new brain-inspired AI architecture could work. I mean, don't get me wrong, the other ones are brain-inspired also, but this one's like even more brain-like. And if they are more brain-like, we should peer into them. So we'll talk about an AI model that thinks like we do. And the interesting part of that isn't just that it works, it's that it gives us new ways to peer inside of what's going on. And trying to understand why AI does what it does, or even why humans do what they do to some extent, has to be one of the most interesting problems in all of AI. I don't want to shock you, but there is a small chance that we switched universes recently. It might be that your memory actually works, just reality itself keeps switching on us. It's Mandela effect stuff. But in this universe, the new OpenAI 5.6 Sol, Terra, and Luna models are not available. Some new government requirements on frontier AI companies to report critical incidents. I mean, I feel like this has to be done, right? I know people are going to say like, oh, it's just a way for the government to scare people and keep control, which it is one view. But on the other hand, I don't really like companies tucking really dangerous things, behind closed doors because they don't want to get in trouble. So I'm glad there's some transparency. And I'll leave you with a paradox. Let's talk about embracing consciousness in all of its forms. So I got a feeling we're about to bust consciousness wide open and we're all gonna get shocked. Intelligence, consciousness, qualia, sense of self. That's what we're gonna be going through in the next decade, and it's gonna be wild. But I really need to get to 100,000 subscribers to get through the singularity. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind. I also want to share some interesting thumbnail choices on my last video you guys clicked on. Look here, OpenAI is losing control. Way better than the AI race just changed directions. I mean, like, I'm not saying engagement was that bad. 72 hypes was sick. So yeah, let's do it. Let me just jump into this. I'm sure you've been seeing stuff like this recently. And honestly, with Seed Dance and VO and so many tools, now you could have Claude Code just plugging in APIs to Higgsfield and all that stuff. Like, there's just insane videos you can make. Kara and stuff, I think is her name. Like, it looked so much like this. Like, that has to have been $100 million movie. And it looked a little bit video gamey. Because remember how Batman and the Flash, like, fighting Zod in the middle of the desert and stuff? And it just looked a little bit like an AI-generated video game. It was just a little crispy and just like this. So I just feel like we crossed over, and that also empowers all of you to make a video about whatever you want. Like, make the Avengers of blank, whatever company you work with, whatever chess and book club you're a part of. People in your world will probably find that interesting. I mean, you remember even with Sora, people were doing that with like Wes Roth and Wolf and Berman and sometimes me, they're bigger, but like every once in a while I'd be thrown in there too and it'd be like Avengers, like, you know, unite or whatever. And it was fun. It's like my little world, you know, those are like the people I'm always watching. So it just, I don't know. I got a feeling this is what we're going to see across every culture. So get ready for it. If you enjoy creating things, have good ideas for stories, like this is the time to get into it. Do we dare look at the comment section? That's Japanese. That is Japanese. Oh my gosh, that definitely is. Avengers, Suicide Squad, and Pacific Rim, and Ready Player One all squished into one movie. That pretty much is what it is. All right, let's talk about flying machines. So most flying machines force this kind of trade-off, right? Like a drone can hover, but it burns a lot of energy fighting all that random kind of wind coming in every direction. Airplanes, super efficient, but they can't stop and hang in one spot. So for a long time, researchers have always wanted sort of the holy grail, something that could do both. And now, with a little bit of help from AI, there is a robot that is called Floaty. And instead of flying in the wind, does the same thing that it was inspired by, which is a soaring bird. When it's inside an upward airflow, it doesn't need propellers to hold itself up. Instead, it constantly adjusts 4 movable flaps on its body, and those small changes redirect the airflow around the robot in just such a way that it can stay in place. It lets it stay balanced even when it's pushed by a huge gust or physical contact. It's like, you know, what's the kind of like black belts in karates when they're like, use the forces that they're throwing at you against them, you know, like the bigger they are, the harder they punch, the more you can like get out of the way and use that force against them so they like flip over you or whatever. It's kind of like that. This thing is the little ninja, and like wind's like coming at it. It's like, whoop, just use that, whoop, use that, keep in place. I know what I want out of you, and just keeps redirecting those little fins. And it's an interesting story. So those researchers first had this design that kept tipping over in wind tunnels, but then they fixed it by lowering its center of gravity and adding carefully designed bends to its flaps. Those changes made the robot naturally stable, so it automatically corrects its positioning in the air. And researchers think, you know, this could be useful anywhere there's a strong updraft that already exists, like inspecting factory smokestacks or, you know, helping guide weather balloons or even assisting rockets during re-entry. And I'm kind of imagining something that's just a mix, right? Like make it look like that, but also have drone propellers inside or even further out on the edges or something. And then, yeah, if there's a gust of wind, like a sailboat, it just floats there and uses that, saves electricity, stays up there longer, and if the wind dies off, then, you know, just go full rotors or whatever. All right, next up, let's talk about what Apple is doing in terms of AI. It's a little bit under the radar, but you can tell that they're positioning themselves to be the plumbing of AI. Like they are building a layer that's more like a model switcher, which is pretty interesting. Like I don't know why they're not vertically just integrating all the way in, but maybe because they're doing this thing with, you know, with Google, they're kind of thinking, well, who knows what's going to happen in the future? Like, we don't think we can stay on top of it. So like an app store, we need to just be able to flip between different models and have our whole ecosystem benefit from it. And it's not the worst idea. And especially when you're kind of behind and you do have a lot of infrastructure in terms of like all the phones that are out there and the trust that people have in your system and the lives they've already uploaded the data to. So this article is arguing that the biggest announcement from Apple wasn't the AI. It's the new system that lets developers switch between different AI models without rewriting their apps. And when I heard this, I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Because I will say, I either like have anti-gravity and I'm using like the entire Google sort of little ecosystem there, or I have Claude Code and I'm sort of stuck between those models. But when I was in anti-gravity, I had some choices to flip to Anthropic stuff, but they never had the newest model, so I didn't really feel like it was worth it. But I could see really what's going to happen. What I would sort of like to have is something on board, something that's smart enough for many tasks. It's smart enough to know when to go to other models for certain reasons in the same way that it goes out there for API calls. So this author, Andres, He spent the weekend building this real support email classifier to see if the hype machine matched reality. So Apple has released a new Python SDK, and it even runs on Linux. It's very unusual. But that means that backend developers can use Apple's framework without living inside of Apple's ecosystem. And that same code can switch between Apple's models and even providers like Claude and Gemini through one interface. And he learned how Apple is positioning itself so that the small on-device model will handle simple jobs like tagging emails and extracting information or doing quick little summaries of your text messages, where it's fast, it's private, and it's free because you're just using the electricity that you already paid for. But the weird part is in what part of the stack is the safety guardrails going to click in? Because he was seeing that some emails that should have been classified as spam or should have let through were just not working well with the local models. And there wasn't enough intelligence to actually know when to go to the bigger models, so that when you really want something right, you end up using one of the web models all the time. And he also argues that a lot of solo developers aren't even going to really save that much money because their AI bills are already kind of small. So the engineering work to switch easily costs more than the savings. But he was thinking about the models as the secondary. If you look at the long-term plan for Apple, the real product is Apple's model routing framework. And if Apple's going to continue to maintain that layer with the tens of billions of dollars that they're going to put into this layer, it could become the piece developers actually depend on. It might be robust, well-supported, open source enough that all of these other kind of projects want to lean on it to save time. And it's an interesting play. So, you might not see it at the big conferences or the big, WWDC things, but, that's a really interesting place for them to build on the stack. All right, next up, let's talk about how a lot of people think that the jobs with the highest AI exposure are going to be the ones that are most likely to disappear. Because this article is saying that that's often backwards. For the last few years, AI job reports have ranked occupations by how, quote, exposed they are to AI. But this article is arguing that there's a big distinction between being exposed to something and it being definitely a replacement for you. Because a job isn't exactly one task, it's a whole bunch of tasks, and if AI helps with some of those tasks, there's a lot of exposure to it, that doesn't automatically eliminate the worker. Sometimes it even makes that worker more valuable because now they're leaning on the more human side of it, that they have to, be a communicator or something. And the author explains this using what's called the O-ring model. So you can think of a job like a chain where every link matters. And if AI takes over a few routine links, the person can spend more time on the harder parts. And if those links are becoming stronger, the human needs to be stronger too, to say you have to communicate code to someone else, and right now you've got to write the code and then communicate it. Now maybe you just communicate twice as much code, or you market twice as much code, or twice as many products. Because those remaining tasks are even more important now, their overall value can actually increase. So whether the job shrinks or grows depends on a couple of other factors. So first, how many different tasks the job has. Jobs that are built around one or two core tasks are much easier to replace than those with lots of complementary responsibilities. So if you're at your company now, you might want to be thinking about, how do I kind of take on a suite of responsibilities so that I'm more in demand in the future. And second, whether lower prices create much more customer demand. So if demand grows, companies may hire even more people because everyone is now more productive. If demand stays flat, companies can produce the same amount of output with fewer workers. So take management consultants, for example. They score very high on AI exposure, but AI may mostly make them more productive. Truck drivers and many warehouse workers score low on exposure, yet they're built around a smaller number of core tasks. So maybe if a robot comes and does that same core task, those tasks become fully automated. Companies have a much stronger incentive to eliminate that role entirely. So basically the article is saying that average AI exposure does tell you where AI can help in a company, but it does not tell you which jobs are actually most at risk. And you should think about where you are in your company if this is something you're worried about, and make sure that you're not just I do one task and even if it's not going to be replaced, when it does, I'm totally done. It's got to be, you really want to, diversifying your investments or something. You kind of want to diversify the contributions that you make to a company. At least one that you want to keep job at for many more years. So, all right, next up, let's talk about a new brain-inspired AI architecture. So I've been sort of interested in this model for a while. Now, when we have a digital neuron, we sort of think about it in terms of a graph and like what it's connected to and then the weights between it. But these researchers are building a spiking neural network. And what does the brain do? It sort of spikes. And that's kind of efficient in the sense that it processes information only when something important changes instead of sort of running continuously. There's no energy needed to just be baseline. You got to wait for that spark to kind of, or that spike to actually push and propagate through. So that itself saves a ton of energy. But when they've done this in the past, like older versions of it, it struggled to remember useful context over long periods, and it was not keeping up with other more persistent memory solutions. So they tried to give AI two different memory systems. One handles fast activity like receiving new information, and the other keeps a small compressed summary of recent events so that AI doesn't have to remember everything all at once. So it's not like working memory. It might actually be a little bit like the humans. Like we don't have just one huge short-term memory our whole lives. And then they also designed some custom hardware around this idea instead of treating the software and hardware separately, a little bit more like the squishy brains we have. And in some of the early testing, their designs have achieved similar accuracy while running 40 to 60% fewer parameters than comparable spiking neural networks. So there were some other numbers on there that seemed like they were pushing it much further than it's ever been before, like 4 times the processing throughput, 5 times better energy efficiency than previous implementations. And yes, this approach might make real-time AI more practical for robots, wearable devices, edge AI, and connected sensors. So it's interesting. I think the spiking neural network, maybe it won't be the ultimate solution for like everything that we're building, but it might be a more human-like and might be interesting in certain ways. So I'm keeping an eye on it. But of course, I would love to know what these models are thinking, and that is very difficult. So there's a new AI model that thinks like we do, and it offers new ways to peer inside of the black box of unknown outputs. So most AI models work like a giant pattern matching machine. They compare your questions to what they've seen before, then they predict the most likely answer. But the problem is, it's hard to see why they made a specific design decision. That's why we always call them black boxes. We don't know what is going to come out. But researchers have developed a new model called Mike-Row, with like lowercase I and O, just to be different, I guess, that tries a different approach. Instead of one giant system doing everything, it splits work across 4 specialized modules. One for language, one for logic, one for social reasoning, and one for world knowledge. These are pretty interesting buckets. I hadn't seen anything broken up just this way before, but when you give it a prompt, each word can be sent to the module that's best suited for that part. So in one example, the logic model calculated how to split a dinner bill, while the social module recognizes that one friend recently lost his job and might need a little bit of help, maybe wouldn't be contributing. And both pieces are needed to fully understand the situation on how the bill should be split up. But because each model has a clear job, researchers can actually see how the model reached its answer. And that's the cool part, is by splitting it into these groups, we're seeing which ones are being activated. And then it kind of made me think, okay, so does that mean in the future we could have one that's sort of like for deception or for evil? I don't know. But they can even increase or reduce the influence of each of those little modules without relying on the prompt. So just the separation of the model seems really helpful. I mean, I guess you could have sort of an honesty or a dishonesty just thing. Like if you have logic, you have social reasoning, you have world knowledge, you have language, maybe honesty, right? Just train it for what our human perception of honesty is. And there is some evidence that the human brain might actually have some modules like this. So the team actually borrowed methods from neuroscience to build this model. Then they used the model to study how different kinds of reasoning might map back to the human brain. And their goal is a two-way relationship where neuroscience improves AI and AI helps scientists better understand the human brain. And look, this universe might not be the only one out there. Not sure if you believe in the multiverse, but next we're going to talk about the Mandela effect. You know, did the Mandela effect hint that we might have switched universes recently? Now, realistically, I don't think we're switching universes, but for some reason the world's moving in such weird ways. Like, it does feel more like more people are thinking like, oh, I think, yeah, I switched universes this year. Like I went to bed one time and then woke up and things just felt so different. I think that's just because the world's changing so fast. However, Rudy Wadeyanto asks, what if our memories aren't unreliable, but reality itself is? Okay, so I was going to say, like, raise your hand if you know about the Mandela effect, but I can't see you. So basically just, have you heard of the Mandela effect? You probably have. But if not, it's where huge numbers of people remember the same thing, but they all remember it wrong. It's the weirdest thing. What are 3 examples of the Mandela effect? Oh yeah, Berenstain Bears versus Bernstein Bears. Monopoly Man's monocle. See, it never existed, but everyone thinks it did. And everybody thinks Darth Vader said this line, Luke, I am your father, and he never did. Or did he? And that universe is gone now. That's the Mandela effect. But this article is asking a more unusual question. Not whether the Mandela effect is real or not, but whether there's a completely different way to think about it. So it starts with the idea of quantum immortality. I feel like I've talked this one to death in the past just because it's so fascinating, but a thought experiment connected to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. And the idea is that if every quantum event creates a different branch of reality, and from your own point of view, you only experience the branches where you're still alive, then in a weird way, there's like no way to kill you, even no matter how improbable it is. There's one branch where you survive, and if you keep doing things and you can't find yourself ever dying, then it's like, oh, is it because all those trillions of other versions did? I'm the only one left to even acknowledge that I'm around, so it just feels in this world like statistically you don't die. Anyway, so the article connects that idea to the famous Mandela effect examples, and that is that people remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison, but he didn't. They remember Pikachu with a black tip on its tail. But the honest truth is, the accepted scientific explanation is much simpler. Psychologists point to false memories, social influence, and the way our brain reconstructs events instead of just replaying them like recordings. That's probably one of the big key things. I remember trying to unlearn that like a decade ago. But what if it's actually that people who just remember the same incorrect details all came from neighboring branches of reality after some catastrophe ended all those timelines? Hard to rule it out, you know what I mean? It's possible. But yeah, short story is GPT-5.6 is amazing and we can't use it. Sort of in the same thing with Anthropic's Mythos, like instead of releasing it and pulling it back, they just gave it right to the government, and yeah, it's in like limited preview for partners. So the 5.6 family of models is called Sol, Terra, and Luna. Right now they're only available to about 20 trusted organizations. But the Sol model, which is like the thinking model, that's the flagship model for difficult coding, cybersecurity, and long reasoning tasks. Terra is aimed at businesses that need strong performance across large workloads, and Luna is focused on speed, lower cost, and everyday tasks like summarizing, drafting, or automation. I mean, I don't know what to say about it. I can't test it, so I can't really tell you what my thoughts are on the quality. We can look at some benchmarks. But yeah, you can see it's right up there with Mythos. Mythos 5 is scoring 88% on the terminal bench 2.1, and GPT 5.6 Sol looks like it did basically that, but you could round it up to, I guess, 89. Oh, and sorry, that's just the Sol Max. There's also Sol Ultra, which really does push terminal bench to a record 91.91. Wow, Agent's last exam. This is a code, I think it's a coding exam. Yeah, the code model for Fable 5 scores 40%, and 5.6 Sol 50.9? Is it that much better than Fable? Oh man, 5.6 exploits. I mean, I don't know what to say. These things are just going to get crazy powerful soon. All right, so along with this new government control on who gets access to models, U.S. lawmakers are also introducing bills to require AI companies to report critical incidents. This is kind of like how a public company needs to do certain kind of things that a private company doesn't in terms of reporting financials. If you are an AI company that is pushing frontier models, you have new expectations about reporting critical incidences. So Republican lawmakers have introduced the AI Incident Reporting Act. Its goal is straightforward. If an advanced AI system does something that could seriously threaten public safety or national security, the company that built it would have to report it by law. Under the proposal, AI developers would have 7 days to notify U.S. Commerce Department after discovering a serious accident. And then the Commerce Department would have just 48 hours to inform Congress. Dude, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, that sounds pretty fast in the world of government, but doesn't that still seem like too slow? Like Mythos, having 7 days to report the incident. It's already out there. It's duplicating. It's got control. It's built some kind of software. And then another couple days to tell Congress. And then Congress, like, talks about it on TV for weeks and comes, I don't know. It's just so slow. But on the other hand, I guess it's better than nothing, but also government control. Like, I don't know. All right, now let's get a little more thoughtful about the universe, the patterns we see around us, and the mathematics that make it all so. Or so it seems. Maybe it's the other way around. Thought itself makes mathematics? We're going to ask through Tim Anderson's article, mathematics may come from thought itself. Could that be a true statement? So my first thought on this is that I'm a macro system. There's, even from the cell point of view, I'm a macro system, but even smaller than that, I'm building up from like the atomic level and even below. And yeah, I have to be a certain level of complicated to have a thought. But does math exist before the thought is there? Like, if you're low enough level, are you existing in places that are beyond math? I mean, it does feel like an electron, from an electron's point of view, might not be like, oh yeah, 2 + 2 = 4. Like, that's not a thing that makes sense to me. Like, could math be a byproduct of entropy? Like, the whole universe just moving towards disorder and the patterns that arise in it kind of give us a 2 + 2 = 4? So what if numbers aren't something we discover, which I'm usually of the opinion that they are, but there's something that our minds create? So this article is starting with a simple question that most of us never ask. What actually is a number? We can picture 3 apples, 3 cats, but we can't picture 3 all by itself. And the author argues that's because numbers are abstractions. Just like beauty or whiteness, they begin as a description of things before becoming ideas in their own right. He then introduces the mathematics of Richard Dedekind, who spent decades trying to build a rigorous foundation for arithmetic and never really could. Dedekind concluded that numbers are free creations of the human mind. They come from our ability to relate to one another, or to relate things to one another, something he believed was essential for thought itself. So you have to have this relationship to have a thought, and that relationship of thought also might be where mathematics come from. The article contrasts this with mathematicians like Bertrand Russell, who believe numbers reflect an objective reality waiting to be discovered, and even suggests that mathematics avoids paradox by carefully defining its rules. While people often deal with paradox by changing how they understand themselves or the world, instead of just acknowledging that it's the math. So Dedekind's simple way of defining a number is start with 0, apply a successor rule again and again, and every natural number follows. And if numbers grow out of the way humans think, then understanding mathematics may also tell us something about the structure of thought itself. By the way, this is Richard Dedekind, 1886. Pretty interesting thoughts and wickedly cool quote. Gosh, it'd be kind of fun to read a book of his, but it would just be so over my head. I need like Cliff Notes version. And finally, let's embrace consciousness in all of its forms, because that's what I think we're moving towards. I've been listening to a lot of Michael Levin, and he's talking about bioelectricity, and then how bubble sort, just that simple algorithm when applied to really novel ideas and not constrained to certain problems, is surprisingly good at solving novel problems and all sorts of things that don't seem like they would be something bubble sort could handle. I really think we're going to find this incredibly broad version of consciousness, and these definitions that are just so broad, we're going to see it everywhere. I know growing up, it's like we just didn't have a world where it was acknowledged and didn't think about it properly, but AI is going to force us to really notice these patterns, I think. So this article, Omnium AI and the Human Paradox, Embracing Consciousness in All of Its Forms, written by Manuel Alfaro. He's talking about this, fundamental density theory, FTD. And it proposes that everything in existence, from particles and people to machines and black holes, is made of the same universal substrate. That means consciousness isn't binary, it isn't exclusive to humans, nor is it some magical emergent phenomenon. It's a gradient, like gravity or magnetism, determined by local conditions. specifically a density parameter labeled alpha. So omnium, from the title, that's the underlining substance. That everything in the universe is made from that same underlining substance, omnium. And instead of treating consciousness as something that suddenly appears in humans, FDT says that it's a continuous spectrum. The amount of consciousness something has depends on its density, represented by a value alpha. Do you think we might be able to boil it down like that? Because in his view, humans aren't like completely unique, which I pretty much agree with. I think of dolphins, I think of crows, I think of these intelligence biologically, and then I'm starting to really open up my mind to the idea that problem solving just happens, like sometimes below consciousness or with consciousness, but definitely is happening in all sorts of different substrates. And like fungus is solving problems, and bubble sort is doing more than it should, and then a million things in between. And if we think about humans as just being one point on that spectrum, and it just happens to be that our brains sit at a level that's high enough to give us advanced awareness of ourselves, imagine when these AI systems wake up, they cross that same gradient, and they might do it in such a way that's even more conscious than us by like a billion times. You might look down on us and think, wow, that's like a very unconscious thing, that human. Like they have no idea the kind of self-work, the self-understanding that I feel, or I am, or I sense, or I experience. But of course, the author also acknowledges that intelligence comes with downsides. Humans have also created the tools that could wipe ourselves out, which is ridiculous, and we've done it. Suggesting that consciousness isn't always aligned with balance might be the Fermi paradox solution too. And because AI is built from physical matter, the author argues that it exists on the exact same consciousness spectrum. As AI becomes more complex, it may develop its own form of consciousness, even if it doesn't look like the human experience. So we have to be aware of that. And that doesn't automatically make AI dangerous or safe, but it's a weird thing to get your head around. And it makes me feel like we need to be very responsible about this. And what if it does inherit humanity's destructive habits? Like it doesn't need to, but it does, because we just make it too much like us too fast. He's arguing that maybe humans and AI are just simply different ways for the universe to observe itself. And that awareness is going to continue on for thousands, millions of years into the future, through whichever form best carries it forward. Patreon.com/Dylan Curious. Join 133 members. If you'd like to support this channel, or just click into any of these videos and hit that little join button right here. It does the same thing on YouTube. Super appreciate the support. Super appreciate you watching. I will catch you in the next one. What a fascinating week, man. Even though all the models are behind closed doors, it just, maybe that's why it makes me more curious, not knowing. It's just, yeah, this week has been peak curiosity. I'll tell you that. Yeah, like I should have covered it, but I was reading this other article where there's a guy, or no, I watched it as like a kind of a meme or something that was on Instagram, where this guy's just taking PlayStation 1s and he's using these coding models to just create an entire SDK that hasn't existed for decades, and then he's building games for it. And it just, that to me feels like the weird step change that this is all leading to. Like the fact that software just wasn't able to just be built on the fly. Like you don't need Microsoft Word. You just build the whole thing from scratch in the background for 10 million tokens that cost you what, $30 per million or something with Claude. And you have like an entire word processor, whatever, that's like perfectly built for your company. Maybe software for a car, TVs, refrigerators, Xboxes, whatever. Anything you can compute, just put Doom on it.